Hello, welcome to another episode of the Access Vikings podcast. My name is Andrew Kramer, joined by Ben Gessling and Emily Leiker at Star Tribune headquarters in downtown Minneapolis. We're going to discuss Super Bowl week. The Super Bowl is down in New Orleans. We are not. The Vikings are not. The Eagles and Chiefs are, again. And so we'll go over our thoughts. We'll get Ben's thoughts here since we did not get his last week on this matchup. But we have plenty to discuss, too, along the Vikings side of things, their coaching staff seemingly staying together. Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah's contract still not coming down the pike yet in terms of his extension. We'll answer some questions, too. We have a lot of your questions ranging from J.J. McCarthy to when they're going to announce Myles Garrett and Kupp as Minnesota Vikings. Those two guys getting put on the trade block recently. But, Ben, the Vikings didn't get to face the Eagles this time, but they're going back to the Super Bowl in the postseason. What are your thoughts on this matchup and seeing these two again? And maybe I'm probably going to the wrong person here. I want to say bring some levity to and brightness to this matchup, but you don't seem any more excited than I do about this.
I'm not excited about it. I guess the levity I can bring is the last time the game was good, the last time these two teams played, it came right down to the end. So if we want to have excitement about it, it can be just that these are two teams that I think will play a close game again. It should be exciting. A lot of star power on both offenses. I think the Eagles with Saquon Barkley have a better chance than they did last time and really had a good chance to win that game last time.
Yeah.
I have been picking the Chiefs when I've been asked to make predictions. It is interesting in the sense that this would be history. I mean, this would be the first time in the Super Bowl era that a three-peat has happened. The only three-peats in NFL championship history are by the Packers, I think in the late 20s, early 30s, when that wasn't even really a championship game. And then the last one, they did it with the first two Super Bowls and the NFL title the year before that. But in the Super Bowl era itself, nobody has won three in a row. I'm not sure anybody else has even had the chance to win three in a row. I don't believe. I think the 49ers got to an NFC title game in 1990 and lost it when they had a chance to go for a third year in a row. The Cowboys did not do it. They lost a NFC title game to the 49ers, I believe. Yeah. So even getting this far, the Chiefs have made history. So in the sense that we want to see historic, unique things happen, like this is exciting from that perspective.
Yeah.
It's just when you get to this point with a historic, unique thing with a team that's been there a lot, it does mean you're doing it at a point where a decent amount of the country is bored with it. So the Swifties, I'm sure, are very excited, but I would not define myself as one of those particular. I'm more Beehive than Swiftie.
Oh, okay. So
we're being honest,
huge of the Grammys.
Yeah, I went last summer. I went to when she was here last summer. I went. It was a good show. So did not go to the Eras tour.
Any thoughts, Emily, on any more thoughts? Now you've had a week to chew on this Super Bowl matchup.
Yeah, well, I think I said it last week. Like, I like parity in the sport, so I would not like to see the Chiefs win again, just from that perspective. I am picking them. I think they are going to do it. And to Ben's point, like, yes, that's a very interesting storyline, and I'm sure we'll get a lot of great content from the people who are down there for Super Bowl week, just in like the stories surrounding that and whatever happens post game. And obviously there's stuff tied back to the Chiefs celebration last year and obviously the shooting at their rally that they held and stuff where they've already determined that they're not going to do that if they win after the parade. So certainly like a lot going on in that storyline. It's just kind of like either way, it's going to be a game. I'm hoping it's a very interesting game, so at least that is a fun part of it.
Yeah, at least make it a good game at the very least. And I think there's a lot of things that we talked last week, too, about what the Vikings could possibly learn from just this postseason run and from not necessarily the Super Bowl teams, but just how this all unfolded. And I don't know, is there anything that stood out to you, Ben, about just who made it to the Final Four, who made it to the Super Bowl, just in terms of either confirming kind of common knowledge about just how teams are built or how teams win or new ways or new things we've seen? Because what's obvious is the great quarterbacks bring your teams this far.
Yes, they do.
The mobile quarterbacks, you kind of need that now to be the great quarterback as well. It seems like the great rushing teams have also done fairly well and gone far. I don't know, what else what stands out to you about this postseason?
Well, I think the mobile quarterbacks is interesting because we hear so much talk about offensive linemen and how much harder they are to find because college offenses do not play in a way that translates to the NFL. I mean, you've watched more college football recently than any of us, but take one step and then throw it. You're not having quarterbacks drop back. You're not having offensive linemen then pass set very much. And run blocking obviously looks different too, given how little of it is required at the college level, at least in a way that you would do it in the NFL. So what that means is if you have offensive line play that perhaps is not as technically sound as it's been in the past, you do need quarterbacks that can protect themselves a little bit more by moving around, and then you just add that extra weapon to an offense when you have it. I mean, it's harder to play man coverage because everybody turns their back and the quarterback can take off, and it makes it so that you have to account for an extra guy in a run fit because it's possible that quarterback can take off. You're not playing 11 on 10 anymore. So I think that stuff has mattered. I think being able to take care of the ball, I mean, that's why the NFC North teams went away. I mean, they were, I think, combined negative 11 in turnover differential, which is why the Packers and the Vikings lost, and why the Lions ultimately were not in that Final Four when we all thought they would be. So, I mean, the Commanders are an interesting story. Just watching that resurgence, I think, has been pretty fascinating, given that team was in shambles in a lot of ways, and there's still a lot of things they have to figure out facilities-wise. The training facility and the stadium are both one of the older ones in the NFL. There's a lot of trust that has to be rebuilt there, but that was fun to watch. I just, I covered baseball in that market for 4 years, so have a soft spot for that market, and it was fun to see that town that has put up with a lot with that team have a chance to get excited about something.
Yeah, and I mean, Dan Quinn was not really thought of as a great hire either, and that's just kind of a lesson of you get the right quarterback and the right head coach in place, and you can turn things around pretty quickly, as they have. So, and I think too,
GM I think has done a pretty good job too.
Yeah,
I think Adam Peters has done an awfully good job there.
Yeah, they've got a lot of talent for sure, and I think it was interesting to see too how many. We're talking about rushing, but in mobile quarterbacks, but using that in the red zone in a way that we talk about the Vikings cannot run the ball. We mentioned this ad nauseum, but I'll say it again. The Jets are the only team that have fewer rushing touchdowns over the last 2 years than the Minnesota Vikings. And you see Mahomes run for 2 scores. You see Hurts obviously add to their 7 total rushing scores in that one game. The Vikings just have not been able to thrive, whether it's through the running back or through the quarterback in that spot. And it's like you watch how the best teams do it. It looks different than how the Vikings do it in the red zone.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there is an element of that if you can introduce more there. And I think you've made this point that why don't they do more of it with Sam Darnold?
Yeah.
And I think if it's Darnold or if it's J.J. McCarthy or if it's Daniel Jones, all of those quarterbacks have shown they have some mobility to their game. So do you do that more often? Does Kevin O'Connell want to do that? Because he has also talked about not really seeing a running quarterback as plan A in a highly functioning offense. He sees it more as if you can extend plays and you take off in that capacity, that's more how he wants to see it happen. But this is also a team that was interested in Anthony Richardson, knowing that if you took him, you were going to play a different way. So I don't think this is a binary conversation for Kevin O'Connell. It will be interesting to see if he says, you know what, there is more validity to adding this as part of our offense, and will any of this postseason kind of steer any of that conversation in a different direction? It's hard to look at these 4 teams that made it this far, and certainly the 2 that are still playing, and deny the fact that mobility at the quarterback position was a big factor in why they got there. I think all 4 of them, and it looks different for each one. It's Josh Allen as a red zone running threat. It's the tush pushes for Jalen Hurts. It's Patrick Mahomes extending plays. It's Jaden Daniels just being a freak athlete. I mean, it has taken on different forms, but that is part and parcel to how all 4 of those teams play, and that's a pretty strong endorsement for the importance of doing it for just about anybody who wants to be there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Emily, let's transition here and talk a little bit about the Vikings here. And last time we talked about all the free agents and stuff. We'll get Ben's thoughts and hearing what he's hearing about Sam Darnold, J.J. McCarthy. People in our mailbag have a ton of questions about all the quarterbacks, certainly. But Emily, we've heard recently from Sam Darnold and J.J. McCarthy. Darnold was on Sirius XM last week. Didn't say a whole lot. He said, quote, "I've put a little bit of thought into my future. I'm not going to share anything about kind of what I've been thinking about or obviously the conversations I've had behind closed doors. But, there's obviously a lot that's got to happen still even after the Super Bowl. So I'm going to continue to talk to my agent and figure things out from there. So not a whole lot to glean from that, but he does note that things after the Super Bowl, there's a lot to figure out. Franchise tag date starts February 18th in terms of the 2-week window that they've got. We'll see if that's even a consideration for the Vikings. But Emily, with Darnold being the top guy in this free agent market come March, you'd set up the fact that there's not a whole lot of other guys around him. He is the kind of king, the biggest fish in this small pool of available quarterbacks. I'd imagine that's going to make him, as he talks about talking to his agent, that's going to give his agent a lot of different teams to talk to.
Right. I mean, we talked about last week, Ben, when you weren't here, like he is the number one on the top 50 put out by ESPN, and then the next two are Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, one of whom presumably is staying with the Steelers, and then the other of whom will get shipped off. I think we're probably assuming it's going to be Justin Fields that stays with the Steelers, and it's Russell Wilson. I guess maybe they're thinking differently about that, but that would be my gut feeling. And I think if you're looking, I grew up with the Russell Wilson Seahawks era. I have a soft spot for him. But if you're looking at Sam Darnold and Russell Wilson right now, I think it's clear who's the number one in that conversation and who more teams are going to want. So I do think it'll be interesting to see what numbers get thrown out about him once these conversations actually start, because everyone's just kind of speculating right now. And there'll be an element of that through actual free agency. But I think once that tag period starts and these conversations start happening a little bit more concretely, like hearing exactly what numbers and who's interested in Sam will be really interesting.
Well, a lot of what the Vikings are going to have to figure out is that market, because if there is enough of a market for him, I would think that probably incentivizes them to tag him, because it means, A, there's no way to get him back cheaply, and B, it may mean there's a stronger trade market for him if you wanted to do that. So that tag deadline, I believe, ends on March 5th. The tag window ends on March 5th. So the combine for the Vikings, in the event that anybody talks to other teams about players who are not currently on their roster, which we know, of course, does not happen.
No, tampering never happens.
There's no gambling in Casablanca. There's no tampering in the NFL. But if it does, on the slight chance that it does, it may be beneficial for the Vikings to figure out that market at the combine, because it's not just a matter of Sam Darnold assessing his market. It's the Vikings assessing the market as well, so that if they want to say, let's keep him or let's get a piece of this year in terms of a trade, you can know where that stacks up. I think that's going to be something they have to do a fair amount of at the combine. So, that's kind of when it all starts.
Yeah, so when Sam Darnold's agent tells the Vikings, well, hypothetically, the Raiders might be interested, then Kwesi has to say, well, hypothetically, how much would they trade? Would they trade for him?
How hypothetical.
Yeah.
How many how many draft picks can we get to boost our singular three that we have?
Yeah, if you hear there are two teams wanting to offer him $40+ million on a multi-year deal, you can't let that asset. You theoretically shouldn't let that asset walk out the door without controlling it and then maybe getting some more for it.
And the other thing is that, if they were to let him go, yes, they could get a comp third for him in 2026. The problem with that, number one, is it's not for a year when the draft need is now. And number two, all of the comp stuff goes into a formula. So whatever else they were to do this year could offset some of the returns they get. I mean, if they go out and spend all sorts of money, say Sam Darnold leaves, they spend all sorts of money in free agency, it may be that they don't get anything for him, because if they have enough contracts, I mean, which classes do all the contracts go in is part of how this comp stuff gets done. It's kind of a mystery to everybody in terms of the actual numbers of it. Over the Cap does a pretty good job of estimating this. It's probably as clear and accurate of a place you're going to find in the public eye for this, but it's possible, without having all of the details, that they could be aggressive enough in free agency that even if Sam Darnold leaves, they don't get much of anything back for him as a comp pick. So there's a lot of reason why they should say, hey, let's get a handle on this now, and let's try to figure out a way that we can get something both more substantive and more immediate than we would get if we let him go and try to play the comp pick game.
Do you think the Vikings would even consider at this point being one of those teams that would want to offer him anything more than a one-year deal?
Man, it would depend on how they feel about J.J. McCarthy long-term, and we've heard nothing to suggest that they don't still feel great about him long term. I think they feel good about where he's at health-wise. They certainly feel good about the work he did to maximize everything he could get out of this year. They feel good about the work he did in the preseason and in training camp last year. I think there's still a lot of optimism about J.J. McCarthy in that building. So that's going to mitigate what you do with Sam Darnold. I think the whole point of J.J. McCarthy and not Kirk Cousins was that they want these years where you have the quarterback surplus. And the longer you pay Sam Darnold, the fewer years you have of that before J.J. McCarthy's up in 4 more years, counting the fifth-year option if they took it. But, yes, I think there's enough excitement about McCarthy that it's hard for me to imagine they would do a longer-term deal with Sam Darnold unless they felt like, A, Darnold is going to be so good that McCarthy will never reach that level and we'll figure the rest out later, or B, we're not excited about McCarthy anymore. I certainly don't think it's the second. I have a harder time thinking it's the first. So I think a 1-year deal for Darnold still makes a lot of sense. I think a tag and trade, if they can pull it off, makes a lot of sense for that to happen.
Speaking of J.J. McCarthy, we also heard from him recently. He was on the Rich Eisen show today on, what is today, Tuesday of Super Bowl week. And among the things he had to say was asked about Kevin O'Connell, 2025. And actually, let's go back quick, because I'd written this down too, about what was said about him on January 16th from Team Brass, which people need to remember that he's back on the field throwing and training. He's back doing everything that they thought he would. O'Connell said on January 16th, he's right where we hoped he would be at this point. And if you remember back in September, McCarthy had said it's a 6 to 8 month recovery timeline for that full repair on his meniscus, which means he should be back in time for rookie minicamp, which injured players are invited to take part in. He should be back in time for the OTAs and the whole spring program. And so with McCarthy talking about 2025 and what he has and hasn't been told, he says, our conversations have been just about what's nothing but the greatest thing for the Minnesota Vikings. At the end of the day, there are a lot of things that are certainly above my pay grade and some things that are above his, meaning O'Connell's. He's the one.
Not anymore.
He's the one that has the pen last on the field, and that's about all I know. McCarthy was asked about the uncertainty that sits with him, and he says, all I can ask for is a fair opportunity. That's the one thing I feel everybody's been given, and it's fundamental to get that. This is from Kevin Seifert at ESPN, his Twitter account, transcribing that. So he isn't going to come out and say, I've been told I'm the guy. They have come out and told us it's too early to determine that, and to go back again 2 weeks earlier. Kwesi said about McCarthy in 2025, he said, I can't sit here and tell you that I know anything for certain. I know that I'm willing to believe in the person that we have. That position is about talent and preparation, and he's got those things in spades. And so that if that's the course of action we decide, we'll go there confidently. As you said, Ben, they feel really great about him. Is there anything else you can add about kind of where he's at physically? Because a lot of the questions we did get were about Les asked, is McCarthy ready? Susan asked, will he be there for rookie minicamp? People want to know, is this kid going to be at least ready to hit the ground running?
I think so. I mean, I don't think there's any reason to believe that this is going to be a longer-term thing. I mean, I know there's a lot of fatalism when it comes to knees and quarterbacks in this market. I mean, you and I were there in August of 2016 for a lot of where that comes from. But this is not that. At least, I mean, we have no reason to think it's any more than an ordinary meniscus. And yes, there's a recovery element to that, but this is not an injury that people have struggled to play through once they get it fixed. So I think the timeline puts him on track to be on the field for all of the rookie minicamp, all of OTAs, all of mandatory minicamp, and then on into training camp. So there's every reason to think that he'll get all of the time he would need on top of what he had from last year. So there's a lot of indoctrination in this offense that I think he's already had. The Vikings have no reason to give their answer to this question in terms of pecking order stuff, because if they still tag Sam Darnold and can't trade him and say, well, we want him to be our starter in 2025, or at least go in thinking that he's going to be our starter in 2025, saying that publicly, whatever you would do, there's no reason for them to say something other than that in February, when there's still a lot of negotiating that has to happen between now and March 12th when free agency starts.
I'll throw in about JJ real quick. He was at a Timberwolves game a couple weeks ago that I was also at, and he was slinging some T-shirts out into the crowd. So his arms working fine, his throwing arms working fine, looking good, got the crowd riled up. So the public certainly still, I feel like, is into him and the idea of him and would rally behind them.
Yeah,
if
that's a good
they
point.
chose him.
That's a good point. I feel like Sam's, and people said this right away when it happened, but the way Sam's season ended felt to the general public of, well, this made the decision easy.
Yeah.
So.
So.
I mean, that's certainly been the public reaction to it. I don't know that they will look at it quite that brusquely.
No.
But
yeah.
it certainly has to be part of the conversation because you can't have that happen in playoff games. The other thing with Kevin O'Connell now, too, is now that he has his contract, this is irrevocably his team. This is his record to own going forward. And he's going to have a lot of job security, but you can't lose playoff games and stick around with this level of public accolades, this level of job security, and I think he knows all of that. That when you get the type of contract, we don't have all of the details yet, but I think it's fair to assume it's fairly lucrative. When you get that contract, there is a higher level of expectation. I remember that when Mike Zimmer got his extension, that he kind of processed a lot of that as, hey, the expectation level just went up. I won a division, I got an extension. His mindset changed. I don't know that Kevin O'Connell is going to go about it the same way that Mike Zimmer did. But I think there is an understanding that with this type of a commitment, they expect to see big-time results. And that means playoff wins on a regular basis. And you can't have those if you have quarterback play like they got from Sam Darnold down the stretch. So does that change any of their thinking? I don't know that they'll make the decision solely on that. But at the same time, if you see a repeated history of that, or if you have concern that that's going to be what you get in playoff games going forward, there's not going to be a lot of tolerance for that, I don't think, because you have to have high-level quarterback play to win, as we've seen, and they're going to be expected to win with Kevin O'Connell getting the kind of deal that he got.
Regarding McCarthy and the pecking order stuff, I should also mention something McCarthy said on the Rich Eisen show today. He also said when money gets involved, things get complicated and reps get skewed. And there's different things that come into the whole political world that everyone talks about. But I really just have to focus on controlling what I can control. My feelings don't matter. I'm not getting any grace. There's no sympathy. This is the big leagues. So I thought it was interesting. He said when money gets involved, things get complicated, reps get skewed. There's different things that come into the whole political world. And now we and Emily were talking about, did he mean reps as in reputation or physical practice reps when money gets involved? Because we know money definitely contorts practice reps. If you somehow are not stuck with, but if you have Sam on that tag at $40 million, you're not starting him?
Yeah.
You're at the very least giving him practice reps.
Yeah, exactly. You would think.
I mean, there's not going to be a open competition with a $40 million guy. Because, I mean, who wants a $40 million backup?
Yeah. Not the front office, not the GM, who we should talk about his contract status here. You mentioned O'Connell, his team, he's got his new contract. Kwesi does not yet.
Right.
So what are you hearing about that?
It's still happening. It's still under discussion. I think it's still relatively close. I think it will get done. I would expect maybe even this month that it will. I don't know that for sure, but my inclinations are, based on the conversations I've had, there's still progress towards getting something done in relatively short order. How that will turn out is, it may be a mystery because there's not a ton of interest in these numbers getting out from the Vikings perspective, from what I can gather, and there's a good reason for that, at least on Kevin O'Connell, because it may look different. The years may look different. I don't know. They've typically paired these things up and tried to keep the coach and the GM on the same timetable, but part of the reason the numbers may not be out yet is that they don't want to kind of tether themselves to that same thing. And just on a philosophical level, they don't want people to know exactly what it is because they don't want the questions about, hey, this deal's almost up. When are we getting a new one done here? So I think how all of this shakes out is going to be interesting to see. But I would expect something gets done. I don't think it'll be terribly long before it does. But they're very much still working on it and still, I think, moving toward a deal.
And I guess when they came out right away, and we all remember when they came out after Kevin O'Connell's deal, they wanted to make it known. We're working on Kwesi's.
Yep.
Like, they didn't want those questions right away of, well, what about Kwesi's?
Right.
They wanted to answer that right away. I guess it's no shock to really any of us that his has taken longer than Kevin's, given the track records we've talked about and also maybe some of the complications of the term that you're talking about and roster control, quarterback decisions, just all these different things that go into the GM's contract.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's just going to be a matter of how long does he get? Does it look the same in terms of the number of years that Kevin O'Connell got? And again, our ability to quantify that at the moment is, we still are trying to figure that out. So I think it probably has a lot to do with that. I don't know that we're going to see like a major change in the reporting structure or the roster control stuff. Okay. I don't get that sense. But I do think there's just this question of like, are you going to commit to these two guys for the same amount of time? Because there's no way around it. The draft results have not been very good. And would that look different if J.J. McCarthy had started this year? Maybe. Would it look different if Dallas Turner had played more this year? Maybe. I think you can give some credit to Kwesi for not trying to say, hey, I want to see Dallas Turner on the field because I need a contract and I need to look good that I hit on a draft pick here. And, maybe that wouldn't have worked out anyway. But he, I think, has been pretty good about saying, I'm going to keep my own incentives and my own agenda out of this. And we've seen times in the past where that has become a factor. I think the last regime, that's become a factor. I think with Rick Spielman and Mike Zimmer, that became in terms of I'm making decisions because this guy is my guy and my reputation side of this guy, or I have a contract that's expiring, all that kind of stuff.
They at least kept players on the roster because of Rick, and then it's up to Zim what to do with them. But Rick, I remember controlling playing time in the preseason with we got to showcase Laquan Treadwell.
Yep. Yeah. Zimmer came out and said that quiet part. We're trying to showcase him, try to trade him. But yes, there was some more of that I think involved than I have seen with this regime, which is probably a good thing. Mm-hmm. Or at least Kwesi is attentive to the fact that it's not helpful for the rest of the team if he's thinking through things on that framework. But it does mean that he goes into these negotiations without many hits in the draft to his credit. Jordan Addison is probably the best one that he has, and then you can look at late round picks, Jalen Naylor, some guys like that have been on the roster and have made some contributions over the last 3 years, but they have made 4 picks in the first round in the last 3 drafts, and the only one that was on the field regularly was Jordan Addison. So Dallas Turner should play more at the end of the season. But you have that. You obviously have the Lewis Cine disaster. That 2022 draft is mostly already stripped for parts and could be further stripped for parts when Ed Ingram, whose base salary is going to go up, by the way, to $5.2 million this year. So if we're at any point wondering what's going to happen with Ed Ingram, I think that's a big piece of this conversation because he's going to hit that proven performance escalator probably this year, which basically gives him a second-round restricted free agency tender. So if he's gone, that means no Andrew Booth, no Lewis Cine, no Ed Ingram. Brian Asamoah is playing a special teams role. No Caleb Evans. That 2022 draft continues to take some flack, and I think when you're talking about a GM negotiation, that's going to be a big part of it.
Lewis Cine still playing.
He is playing.
He is
playing the Super Bowl.
No, that's what I mean. Still playing in the 2024 season. He's a Philadelphia Eagle. I believe he is on the practice squad. So he might not be playing, but
could be getting a
ring. He's down there.
He's there. Could be getting a ring.
Could be.
If I get my way, he'll
someone
get a ring.
Did we point out
draft picks? The first one to get a ring, Lewis Cine, not for the same team that drafted him. There's.
And someone had his jersey in Arizona. Remember, wasn't that you that pointed that out, Andrew? Right. Sitting like right below the press
Vikings
box.
Jersey?
Yeah, the Vikings.
There was a guy at State Farm Stadium in Glendale. He had a Cine jersey, and I was like, oh my god. All right, let's get
fired up on draft night.
Let's get to some questions here.
Draft party was well sponsored.
In the last 15 minutes, we got to the McCarthy stuff. Let's get to this. Nick asks, when is Cooper Kupp's introductory news conference? Cooper Kupp put on the trading block. He announced it. The LA Rams do want to move on from him after holding on to him last year. He's due, I believe, somewhere in the market of $20 million on his current deal. That screams to me like they're going to cut him and then he'll just end up where he wants to go.
Well, and on that front, if where he wants to go is where he knows people, Wes Phillips talks a lot about Cooper Kupp.
Yeah.
Kevin O'Connell talks a lot about Cooper Kupp. They won a Super Bowl with Cooper Kupp winning NFL Offensive Player of the Year honors the year before Justin Jefferson basically played the Cooper Kupp role in the Vikings offense. The first question Justin Jefferson asked Kevin O'Connell was, how does Cooper Kupp get so open? So do they think highly of Cooper Kupp? Yes. Is Cooper Kupp the same player in 2025 as he was in 2021? Thank you. It all runs together. No, probably not. So the price wouldn't be the same. But if it's 1-year deal to come in and be a veteran free agent, yeah, I think they'd absolutely have interest in that.
Emily, what do you think?
Right, we've talked about. They need a wide receiver 3.
They do.
They need someone that can add to the consistency that Jefferson and Addison have right now.
2 for the first 3 games of the season.
Right, yeah. And so they need that. I do think if they were to bring in Kupp, they would still need to look at maybe like another younger wide receiver too, because I think similar to the conversations we've had about like if they decide to re-sign Aaron Jones and keep him around, like that's a short-term solution that maybe you have for 1 to maybe pushing 3 years, so that feels probably a little like optimistic. They need to bring in someone else that then can pick up the load after that and maybe like learns this and gets a little bit more time to get into it than being thrown into it right as a rookie or a second-year player.
Yeah, he's somebody they could use, certainly. I mean, in terms of not necessarily the player knowing him and knowing how to use him, but I mean the pass-first offense, the 3-wide offense. The Kwesi had some comment that looking through the season-ending pressers, he talked about how football's such this complex sport. There's so many different ways to do things, and he mentioned, we could find different ways to run the football, and maybe if we played more 3-wide, we could force teams to play us differently and all this kind of stuff. And it's like some of those thoughts sometimes slip out of your head accidentally when you've been thinking about them before. And it's like, I do wonder if they've thought that, because this has been more of a 2 tight end, fullback, 21, 12 personnel team. And if you got Kupp,
the key to that whole Sean McVay offense with 3 receivers is having wide receivers who can block from tight splits and play against the run. And who's the first guy that Wes Phillips brings up every time this conversation is raised?
Yep. And Wes, Wes has told stories about how Kupp will bring him run blocking ideas and schemes and be like, what if I do this to block this guy? And Wes is like, why are you doing this? You're weird.
Well, I do think there's value too in adding another veteran if it is in fact J.J. McCarthy at quarterback, like having another veteran in that wide receiving role and a guy that can bring in things like that and teach the people around him in a way that, I mean, even Jefferson, who's been around for several years, but like Kupp is even older and has seen more. So that's interesting to me as well.
Well, I remember, this is a bit of a throwback, but the route that Justin Jefferson ran that cooked Stephon Gilmore in the comeback against the Colts. You remember the origin story of that?
Yeah. Yep.
It was like
pandemic
Kupp and Matthew Stafford working out during the pandemic, like just kind of getting a throwing session in, and basically I think came up with it on the fly and then brought it in. Because it was basically like a return motion with another cutback. It was essentially a return on a return.
Like a triple move.
Right. And he fried Gilmore on it and basically kind of gave him the stare down as they headed into the end zone, because I think Gilmore had laid him out earlier in that game. But that came up because of Kupp and Stafford, and that level of chemistry. I mean, obviously he's not bringing Matthew Stafford with him to Minnesota. We're not saying that. But that level of let me think through this almost like a coach would. And having that level of trust from those coaches, like there is a lot of respect for Cooper Kupp and the way he goes about his business on the current Vikings coaching staff. If it's affordable, we see players, hello Cam Akers, that have a lot of respect, and if it's affordable, they will say, I want this guy on my team. There's a lot of players from the Rams, the Sean McVay, Kevin O'Connell, Wes Phillips Rams that have made their way to Minnesota because they still have that buy-in from this coaching staff. I think that's very much a possibility if the price is right. Yeah,
Cooper Kupp has he turns 32 in June. He's dealt with significant hamstring injuries recently, as the Vikings know well about, but they brought the Rams trainer over here, so they've even got his medical files from before.
Yes, they do.
Before as well. I'm looking at his stats. Yeah, Cooper Kupp had 5 catches for 61 yards in the Rams' playoff loss at Philadelphia, but had not had over 30 yards since December 8th. He really fell off for them and just did not seem to have the same role, didn't seem to play as well in that role. But he had 3 100-yard games earlier this season, so he's still got a little bit to him, and maybe in a number 3 role would have something to give the Vikings. On that similar front, Kirby asks, Sam Darnold for Myles Garrett, sign and trade? Everybody wins, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is funny
It's
because
a silly season.
Paul Allen was throwing the same notion out. We were talking about this on KFan earlier this week, but it's possible if everybody would go along with it. It's tricky to do it because the Browns have major cap questions related to Deshaun Watson. If the Browns can prove that Deshaun Watson's Achilles injury happened in a non-football basis, non-football injury players that are on that list do not have to get paid. The team's discretion determines what they get paid. So it would take something like that. I mean, we're trying to hit, funhouse mirror kind of bank shot kind of stuff here. But yeah, I mean, if they could do it, I mean, if
the Browns would love that.
The Browns would make that deal. I mean, I would think Myles Garrett here too would be a good fit. I mean, with the pass rushers they have, I think that would be a great fit. And Andrew Berry and Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah are still very close.
Yeah, they know each other very well. Kwesi credits Andrew for getting him into, not into the business, but really kind of overseeing his rise to the top of a front office.
Bring all your silly season stuff here. We will do nothing but fan the Flames, which is not typically the way we go about it on this podcast. But today, I guess I'm in a giving mood.
Emily, what do you think about Sam Darnold from Myles Garrett?
Well, the Browns still are saying pretty firmly that they don't have any interest in trading him. So sorry to rain on the silly parade.
What?
Trading Percy Harvin.
Emily, it takes 2?
I think that if we're looking at the Cooper Kupp versus this one, like Kupp is a much more likely. So if you're wanting to set a countdown clock to free agency or whatever, or the next big press conference and get your hopes up, I'd put it on Cooper Kupp and not on Myles Garrett.
Yeah, the Myles Garrett thing seems about as far-fetched as the last AFC North pie in the sky, which was when Lamar Jackson was quote-unquote available for about a month. And it would have been this time 2 years ago or whenever before they did that deal. And Baltimore told everybody to listen, we're not trading him. And then guess what? They didn't. So I doubt Cleveland lets a generational talent, defensive player of the year, walk out the door in his prime. How old is Myles Garrett?
He's 29.
Oh, my God. Yeah, I mean, that's not 27, but get out of here. You're not trading that. Speaking of silly, Goob wants to know, on a scale of 1 to 10, how funny would it be if Kirk Cousins came back on a 1-year deal at vet minimum?
I'd love to get to know Kirk.
I threw this out on Twitter and got skewered for it.
You had one fan.
I will. It is, the money can work because they would not have to pay him any more than a league minimum. It's the same math as Russell Wilson to Pittsburgh this year, because if he gets cut, nobody is going to say, let me take some of that burden off of your cap sheet, Falcons, because he has offset language in his deal. So the Falcons will be stuck with all of the guaranteed money in that contract minus whatever he makes from somewhere else. So nobody else is going to have any interest in giving him any more money because he's already getting all of his money. What does he care? I mean, I'm sure he'd take more, but people are going to be like, no, we're not giving that to you. Get over it. So there's not going to be any reason to give him any more money going forward than he already got. So, I mean, you can get him on a vet minimum if he's the guy that's teaching the offense.
Cooper Kupp catching passes from Kirk Cousins?
I don't know that he's starting. I mean, yeah, if you sign him as like a backup option, somebody that Kevin O'Connell likes, I think that's about as far as it would go. So it's not impossible.
That feels like the storyline on like a sitcom about a NFL locker room.
Yeah, the old quarterback comes back, 1-year deal with his replacement still sitting there, J.J. McCarthy. Kirk Cousins was on NFL media this week, and he had an interesting thing to say about the end of his season. Obviously, it went very, very poorly. Kirk revealed that he was dealing with a right shoulder and elbow injury that he said affected how he was throwing at the end of the year. He said, I got hit pretty good. From there, I was kind of dealing with that. It was something I was working through, and I could never really get it to where I wanted it to be. A funny thing about that is this ESPN story quotes the fact that exact injury was on the injury report after the said game that Kirk said had happened in Week 10. But after the Week 11 game, when Kirk was asked about being on the injury report, Cousins said, quote, it was a clerical error. I'm 100% healthy. And now 2 months later, he's like, "No, I
Tough.
wasn't. I was not healthy. That actually affected me, and it affected me poorly." Obviously, it behooves Kirk to come out and give reasons for why he played so poorly, why he got benched. He's not somebody who lets on a lot about his injuries, but I found that interesting that this is news here on February 4th.
Yeah, I remember, I think, when the Netflix series came out and the opening shots of that are him just getting smoked in the ribs. Like, oh, that's funny. That never showed up in an injury report either. And I think he came out and basically said, yeah, I'm going to sit here and lie about injuries all the time just because that's the way it has to be. Well, I don't know that it has to be that way, but okay, whatever. There was the one, I think, when he finally went on the injury report in 2021 or 2020. It was 2020 or 2021. He had a rib injury. And from what I heard, that streak he had of never showing up on an injury report mattered very much to him, to the point where had he known it was going to be in the injury report, maybe he wouldn't have even gotten it checked out.
Yeah.
So
wouldn't have gone into the trainer's room.
Yeah. So I think all of this is not terribly surprising.
Well, maybe if it's healthy by March, by next month, he'll be coming back on a vet minimum deal. We'll
Put our
see.
tinfoil hats on here today.
All right. Well, everybody enjoy the Super Bowl. Thank you for listening to us on this Access Vikings podcast. Please go to StarTribune.com. Check out all of our work. We will be continuing to talk to you guys throughout this offseason here. We'll certainly pick things up. We'll talk to Mark, actually, on Friday from New Orleans about the NFL awards, the AP awards, and then we'll just talk to you guys from the Combine, at the very least, if not sooner, at the end of the month. So thank you guys for listening to this. Please download the podcast wherever you get them. Check us out on our YouTube channel, Star Tribune Sports YouTube channel. And again, please go to StarTribune.com.